Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves trade up to number 8 in the draft and take a consensus top 10 players. A player some boards had in the top 5, and Rob Dillingham of Kentucky. I'll tell you all about who Dillingham is, why it's an exciting move for Minnesota and an incredible move by the Wolves front office. We'll also talk about their pick at 27. Yes, they kept their 27th pick in the draft. Terrence Shannon Jr. out of Illinois. We'll talk about it all on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Happy Thursday, everybody. And it is a very happy Thursday in Wolves land. The Timberwolves moved into the top 10 of the draft without sacrificing any assets on the current roster or this year's draft picks that they already had. And the second round is still tonight. They still have the number 37 pick in the draft. They made 2 picks on Wednesday unexpectedly. Today, what we're going to do, I'm going to break down first the player, who Rob Dillingham is, why he fits the Wolves roster, why the Timberwolves made the move, explaining some of the reasoning behind it. If you're unclear, hey, isn't there already a point guard on the roster? Don't they already have a bucket getter in Anthony Edwards? The answer is yes to both of those things, but there's a reason why, multiple reasons why they made this move. We'll break that down in the middle part of the show today. We'll close by talking about Terrence Shannon Jr., the Wolves' other first-round pick at number 27 out of Illinois. It's all upcoming. First, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And, of course, you can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So much to get to today. I should also say, on tomorrow's show, Friday's show, the plan is we'll see what the Wolves do in the second round. They could always trade out. They could always trade back. They could always pick somebody. They could stash somebody, whatever they do. We'll, of course, talk about that on Friday. I'm also going to Tyler Metcalf of No Ceilings, formerly of Canis Hoopus. He was on the postcast usually for after home games this last year. So if you followed along with the Locked On Wolves postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota or here on this feed, you heard Tyler Metcalf on this feed frequently throughout the year. Tyler and I are going to visit. He spent a lot of time covering the draft for No Ceilings. And he's got thoughts on Rob Dillingham. I'm sure he'll also have thoughts on Terrence Shannon, but I know he's very high on Dillingham. So I'm excited to have Tyler on the show Friday. So you'll get my perspective today. We'll get more of Tyler's perspective on Friday as well, which will certainly be a bit of a different take. So exciting couple of days here at Locked On Wolves. Let's talk about Rob Dillingham. Quickly what the move was before later we'll get into kind of the I guess, justification, if you will, because on its face, I could see why this move may be confusing to people who are casual followers or don't understand like why the Wolves would make this deal. So we'll get into all that here in a minute. But I want to kind of talk about, like, I guess, start with what the mechanics of this trade were. So the Timberwolves acquired the number 8 pick without trading anything on their current roster and nothing related to their draft picks right now. Just now, they became eligible to trade their pick in 2031. Up until today, they couldn't have traded yesterday. They couldn't have traded anything before or after 2030 because of the Gobert trade. And of course, the Stepien rule, they couldn't trade consecutive picks. There's a bunch of swaps in there. So what they did was they traded a pick swap in 2030 with San Antonio, who had the number 8 pick and selected Rob Dillingham initially. It's a top 1 protected pick swap. So as long as the Timberwolves pick is not in the top 1 in 2030, the Spurs have the right to swap it with Minnesota. And then a completely unprotected 2031 first round pick. Nothing until 2030. And nothing on their current roster. And nothing, they didn't trade their 27, which would have been completely understandable. They didn't trade their 37 on Thursday. They traded some stuff that's 7 years down the road because the championship window is open now for a team that went to the conference finals with a 22-year-old superstar. We'll get into a little bit more of that here next, but let's talk about the player they got. Rob Dillingham was a consensus top 10 player. He did slide a bit in some mock drafts. I saw some had him in the late lottery, which was kind of crazy. He didn't do a ton of workouts. There was some ankle injury type stuff, but don't pay attention to any of that. That was all noise, because a few weeks ago, there were some people that were mocking him in the top 3, the top 5 in this draft. And number 8, 9, 10, that was kind of where he was most frequently mocked. A lot of people actually liked him to the Spurs, wanted to see him, draft analysts wanted to see him play with Victor Wembanyama in San Antonio. So all that to say, though, the best ball handler in this draft, a dynamic scoring guard. A lot of people see him as a shooting guard in a point guard's body, but I think he's a better passer, or I should say a better table setter is maybe a better way of saying this, a better table setter than he's often given credit for. He had the passing accuracy isn't perfect, but it's everything leading up until the actual pass that is so impressive to me. And we'll get there in a second. I need to start with the scoring. He was over 44% from 3-point range this year. In his only year at Kentucky, he averaged 15.2 points per game, 47.5% from the field, 44.4% on threes, on 4.5 3-point attempts per game, 4 assists per game, 3 assists per game this year for Rob Dillingham. He's a really good catch and shoot player too. In fact, catch and shoot threes, 48% this year on 88 attempts. So 88 of his 3-point attempts this year were catch and shoot, and he was nearly 50%, 48%. He was also 38% on off the dribble threes. And actually, he's a good off the dribble shooter from anywhere on the floor. He's a true 3-level scorer. The efficiency at the rim wasn't great. And I saw some scouting reports on YouTube, people saying that he's crafty at the rim. And I heard somebody throw out like a Kyrie finishing at the rim, nowhere near Kyrie level at the rim. Like, let's be clear. But the potential is there because he's got such great touch from everywhere else on the floor. Yes, the jumper, catch and shoot off the dribble threes, but he's great in mid-range. The floater is really impressive. Very rarely do we see guys that are this high as lottery picks that do all this other stuff great, that also have a good floater. The floater's already been developed. He's awesome with change of pace. The two most impressive things for me with him, and obviously the 3-point percentage, but a lot of guys shoot well from 3. That's an important piece, yes. But it's the overall touch on floaters, on the jumper, on some of the craftier finishes he had. He sometimes was just inconsistent at the rim, but what he's able to do. And the other thing is his overall feel. And this goes into the point I made a minute ago. Even if some of the passing stuff, the off-target passing could be an issue at times, like just not hitting people right in the shooting pocket. He's inconsistent as a lob thrower, but he can do it. It's the process that leads to it. It's that feel. Like everybody wanted to talk about, and of course, now, these are guys that were mocked later in the draft. I don't know about like a Tyler Kolek, who, by the way, didn't get drafted at all in the first round and was seen by some as a lottery pick. I'm not going to spend, I don't want to like dunk all over Tyler Kolek for not getting drafted, but I was lower on him than most people. I didn't like him for the Wolves at 27. I had him like as my 5th point guard without even Dillingham in the picture. A lot of people liked him. I like Dillingham. That his feel to me is every bit as good. It's the process. Like, it didn't get all the way to the goal line all the time, but his feel for using change of pace in the right way in the half court or in transition, but especially in the half court, like getting guys on his hip and keeping them there, using the hesitation dribble, just like hesied on guys and just made him fall over, like broke a ton of ankles in college. Reading pick and roll coverages is a rare thing for a one-and-done point guard. And I mentioned the inconsistent lobs, fine. That can develop. And with NBA bigs catching those lobs, now, Rudy Gobert, I mean, like, I know he doesn't have the greatest hands, but he can catch a lob. And, having other NBA bigs, and I mean, who knows? Maybe it's Josh Minot in a couple of years catching these lobs, or another athletic big catching lobs. But the reading of the pick and roll coverages and handling that is very impressive. The decision-making, do I pass here? Do I attack here? Do I get the defender on my hip and shoot a floater, or, put on the brakes and draw a foul and knock down a 15-footer? He's good in the mid-range. Like, really, the touch is great everywhere. It really is. And that combined with the way he sees the floor and the decision-making overall, he's just got to finish the process with a more accurate pass more often than not, and he's got to get a little better in the paint. Offensively, he's going to be really good right away. Like really, really good. Like I never want to use the words finished product for a 19 and a half year old one and done college player because he's not a finished product. But like all the stuff that you can't teach, he's got it except for size. Like the floater's there, the touch from three is there, the catch and shoot, the off the dribble, again, the pick and roll feel, the reading the defense, the ability to make the passes is there. Again, it's the completing of the passes and getting more accurate with the passes that's super important. I want to talk about a couple of other things offensively with him, and then defense, which is really my only concern. I'm not super concerned about the the size thing because he's so good with the touch. I'm not super concerned about finishing in the paint. I want to talk a little bit about the defense. Then we'll talk about the process or the Wolves thought process, I guess, behind why Dillingham, why this was the right move for Minnesota this year. We'll close by talking about Terrence Shannon Jr. It's all upcoming here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at GameTime. GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can get tickets to anything, really. Save up to 60% buying last minute for beyond sports. You could also look at concerts, like comedy shows, theater. I attend all of the above, and I'm also often a procrastinator when it comes to getting my tickets, and GameTime is the best place to do it last minute. They also have flash deals. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game time, or ahead of the game or the event, and they have all-in pricing. Toggle the feature on to show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. They also have the lowest price guarantee. GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a lower price somewhere else. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So a couple final things on Rob Dillingham, the player. Again, we'll spend a lot more time on this on Friday. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with him. So excited to see him in Summer League in a couple of weeks too, by the way. But all of my concerns related to Dillingham are defensively. I think he's already an okay point of attack defender. But again, I go back to consistency, which is fair for a 19-year-old one and done player. He's only 19 and a half years old. I also think it's possible he still grows. He's 6'1" with a 6'3" wingspan. I mean, Anthony Edwards grew after being drafted as a one-and-done player. He gets a little bigger, certainly needs to get stronger. He was listed as, I think, 164 at the Combine and reportedly had put on some muscle during the season at Kentucky. If he gets on an NBA strength program and continues to get maybe taller, longer arms, actually build himself more in terms of muscle and frame, I think he could be a solid point of attack defender. He tries defensively. I just think it's a lack of strength and a lack of technique at times. It's not an effort issue. He isn't great at getting through screens, but again, how much of that is technique and getting on an NBA strength and conditioning program? That's like 2/3 of the battle. The other is effort, and I think he tries. It's not D'Angelo Russell who doesn't try and get through a screen. It's, maybe it's Jordan McLaughlin who's too small and not strong enough to get through a screen, but is a smart player and is trying. Like Jordan McLaughlin's 2/3 of the way there, right? And that's why he's a passable defender at the NBA level. Dillingham may end up being slightly bigger than McLaughlin when it's all said and done, slightly longer, and I think could end up having more of a solid build. I mean, we'll see. He's obviously got a ways to go there, but if the technique improves and the effort stays, and he becomes passable defensively, again, like even from day one, though, I mean, the Wolves managed with McLaughlin on the floor. Like when McLaughlin was on the floor, the defense was fine. And frankly, like Mike Conley's certainly bigger. He's like 6'4" with a 6'6" wingspan, something like that. But like Mike Conley's not a plus defender anymore. This isn't 2017 Mike Conley. And the Wolves managed to be the number one defense with him running the show. And the size certainly helps. But, you know, most teams you're going to play over the course of the regular season, at least, you can hide a guy, especially when you've got Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert on the floor, not to mention Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Anthony Edwards, and pretty much always having two of those four guys on the floor, and some other length and size with Nas and Cat. You know, like this is a big team with plenty of defenders that can cover for weak links. And if that's indeed what Dillingham is, right now you're only asking him to play 12, 14, 16, 18 minutes a game. In the regular season, you can handle that. We'll see where things are next spring once we get to April and May and it gets down to it in the playoffs, assuming he does get handed that backup point guard role. But it's not a significant concern. Now, if he's your point guard of the future, I mean, Conley could just decide to retire after this year and leave that last year on the table. He's got, I think, a player option for the last year of the deal for the 25-26 season as a player option. So maybe Dillingham a year from now is the point guard of the future, but it might be 2 years from now. By that point, they're going to know if he knows what he's doing, if he can actually be the starting point guard. And really that's actually leads into what I want to cover next. The Wolves, the value of this deal is actually pretty impressive. To do this deal without giving up anything for the next 6+ years is crazy. It really is. I know it's a weak draft, but this is still a top 10 pick and somebody with clear upside, like all-star level upside. This is exactly how you have to team build when you are going to be up against and over, frankly, in the case of the Wolves, the second apron. I mean, like there's essentially loopholes for first round picks because teams get to sign their own draft picks. And this is essentially a necessity. We talked about this before on the show. Kyle Anderson's likely gone. Monte Morris now especially is likely gone. Jordan McLaughlin may be gone. I mean, that's 3 of your top 5 bench guys. So their top 7 is still there. If you're talking to Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Nas Reed off the bench. So your top 7 guys are still there. You got to replace the rest of the rotation. And this is the first step toward doing that. Secondarily, it's the first step toward replacing Mike Conley in either 12 months or 24 months. He may or may not be productive as a rookie. But if they can bring Jordan McLaughlin back on a minimum deal, or somehow if they get Monte Morris on a minimum deal, I think he'll get more than that. And with the Dillingham drafting, I don't think they're going to give Monte Morris the mid-level exception. I thought before the draft that was a possibility. Now I kind of doubt it. This is one of the few ways the Wolves can add upside talent for the not only next year, but beyond. So Dillingham very likely will be given every opportunity to win that backup point guard role, but they're going to bring in another veteran guard, whether it's Monte Morris or Jordan McLaughlin or somebody else, as a security blanket / competition for the backup point guard role. But how else are you going to add talent to this team? Again, the draft picks are the loophole. And Tim Connolly has full confidence in his own drafting ability, and rightfully so, with the track record of obviously Jokic and Monte Morris and in others. Now, there are other guards, like Bones Highland is an example of a guard that he took in Denver that was an undersized scoring guard in college that had a little bit of a, year and a half or so, a nice run in Denver, but now is kind of a borderline rotation piece at the NBA level, backup point guard. You're trading up to take Dillingham at 8. You think he's going to be better than Bones Highland. Now, he reminds me more of Tyrese Maxey, and I don't say that just because they're both Kentucky guys. To me, he's more, we're going to talk Kentucky guards. I think he's more Tyrese Maxey than De'Aaron Fox because of the shooting ability, which, by the way, Dillingham's a much better shooter than Maxey was in college. It's not even close. Maxey's bigger, sure, but all the offensive numbers are in favor of Dillingham. So I actually think there's something to the success of Kentucky guards in the NBA level, going from Kentucky to the NBA. Sometimes I think those types of things can be noisy, but I think that there might be something there. And I think that, again, I mean, Dillingham reminds me a little bit of Tyrese Maxey, certainly more than he reminds me of De'Aaron Fox. So anyway, in terms of the team building thing, this is how you do it when you're at the second apron. It's either this It's either trading up for a guy with high upside who also probably has a pretty reasonable floor because he's such a good shooter, or it's vet minimum guys. And remember, there's no first-round pick next year. And they did this deal without, I mean, they couldn't have traded one for next year because they already don't have one for next year. They've got a couple of seconds upcoming. And it's also a reason why it wouldn't shock me if they traded out of 37, depending on how the board falls. A lot of teams, late first, early second, there's teams trying to get out and kick the can to the next year or beyond. And there's teams trying to get in because somebody they like, a target has fallen, and they're like, oh, let's get in and get him. So who knows how this shakes out on Thursday. But it wouldn't shock me if the Wolves tried to give themselves something next year to, again, kick this can a little like, hey, we've already got two guys, Dillingham and Terrence Shannon, who we'll talk about in a minute, to add to the roster. Like, plus, we've already got Wendell Moore and Josh Minot and Leonard Miller and some of these other guys, and Jalen Clark in his second year of his two-way coming off the Achilles. We've already got all these young guys on the roster. Let's get a couple more vet minimum guys and kick this second-round pick to a future year. So we'll see. I'm curious to see how that shakes out. But this is how you do it if you're Tim Conley. This is how you go about roster building a contender that's already over the second apron. And I'm not going to talk Karl-Anthony Towns trades. I'm not doing any of that stuff right now. That's obviously the other shoe. I don't say other shoe. That's the pivot, right? That's the next pivot for Minnesota. If things go crazy this year, there's always the Cat trade. There's always the possibility of a Rudy trade or a Nas trade. Like, that stuff could all still happen down the road. It's not happening now. That's not what this move says. And certainly in the wake of some of the other moves around the league, like we talked about on the Minnesota basketball party on Wednesday here on the Locked On Wolves feed, I don't think Cat's going anywhere anytime soon. All right, let's close by talking Terrence Shannon Jr. We'll do that here next. All right, Terrence Shannon Jr. I had him on my Timberwolves big board, which, by the way, if you listened over the last week plus, I didn't have Dillingham on the big board because I only focused on guys who are mocked like essentially late lottery, early 20s into the early second round, because that I didn't think there was a world in which the Wolves traded into the top 10. And I don't blame myself for that because I don't think anyone saw that coming. Incidentally, number one on my Wolves big board, Baylor Shireman, went number 30, the last pick of the first round at Boston. So he was still on the board. Johnny Furphy from Kansas is still on the board. Keyshawn George out of Miami went, I think, 2 picks, maybe 3 picks before Minnesota. Cam Christie from the Gophers still on the board. Jamal Shedd still on the board. Juan Nunez still on the board. I had Terrence Shannon Jr. at 8, who we're going to talk about now. KJ Simpson, I had at 9 still on the board. And again, I covered guys who were going to get picked later. Bub Carrington did go. I forget who he went to, but like early 20s. Tyler Kolek still on the board. And Filipowski out of Duke still on the board as well. So I had Terrence Shannon Jr. number 8. And frankly, if I had known the Wolves were going to draft Dillingham, I would have put Shannon higher. And I said this on Twitter. I don't love Shannon as an NBA prospect. I think there's a reasonable bust potential here, especially based on what he did at Illinois from a scoring standpoint. But given the Dillingham pick, the Shannon selection makes sense. If they don't get Dillingham, one of my gripes to Shannon is he doesn't create in the half court. And he doesn't score consistently enough, especially in the half court. He doesn't create for himself or for others. So much of his damage is in transition or just as a catch and shoot 3-point guy, which is great. That's important. And now it looks a lot better because you have Dillingham. But say they hadn't taken Dillingham and they just walk away with Terrence Shannon Jr., I get it. You're looking at his points per game and what did he shoot? What was his, I'm going to pull it up. I think he was over 19 points per game this year at Illinois. And it's just easy, like if you just look at the box score and don't watch any of his tape, to just be like, oh, okay, this dude's a 20-point per game scorer. It's not, how they get their points is also, that matters. And it was a lot of transition. He's efficient. He's explosive in transition. Oh, I said 19. He was 23 points per game. A lot of transition. He was 36% on threes, but a lot of volume there. 7 threes per game. He was 35% for his career. He obviously got much better there later in his career. So I'm not trying to put down the Terrence Shannon Jr. pick. As I said, I like it in the context of the Dillingham pick, because if you don't take Dillingham, you get a guy that doesn't create for himself or others and is just a track meet star in the open floor with athleticism and a bit of shooting ability. It's fine. He's a plug and play rotation guy, maybe as like an energy dude off the bench, but he's not running that second unit. And you're not going to give him the ball and say, okay, go get us a bucket like you could do with Dillingham. He's not the Jalen Noel, Shake Milton, Dillingham type that's going to try and give you that, at least in the case of Shake and Noel, try, and hopefully in the case of Dillingham, will give you that second unit spark. He's going to be your energy run the floor guy, and he should be able to do that. 23 points per game, nearly 48% from the floor, and 36% from three for Illinois. Of course, he was in the running for player of the year until the legal issues that came up in December. It was sexual assault charge for an incident that allegedly occurred in September in Kansas. I talked about this a little bit on the show the other day when I did a profile on Shannon. He was suspended for 6 games, did come back and play after he sued in the state of Illinois to claiming his civil rights are being violated. He was allowed to play the rest of the year, was great in the Big Ten tournament and beyond in postseason play. And then ultimately was found just a couple of weeks ago not guilty in a court of law on all charges. And the legal issues are now over. And the Timberwolves, of course, would have done their due diligence on this. A lot of teams did. He was still consistently mocked in the first round. So take that all for however you want to take it. It happened. Legally, it's in the past. And now with Terrence Shannon on this show, I'm just going to talk basketball. Now that we've set all that up. Basketball-wise, I think he's got a shot of being a solid NBA rotation player. I think his ceiling is a starter. I don't think he's a star ceiling guy. I just don't. Unless he really develops the half-court stuff. I could be wrong. He's a good athlete, really good NBA body. 6'7", 6'9" wingspan. Absorbs contact well on both ends of the floor. I said this the other day on the show. Fantastic in transition. Absolutely explosive in transition and a good enough three-point shooter. I thought the defense, there's kind of varying opinions on this about whether or not the defense actually got better. I think Billis said on the the ESPN broadcast the draft that his defense improved at Illinois. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure that that's true. I mean, the steal rate went down pretty dramatically. It went down nearly a full point over the last couple of years, going back to when he was at Texas Tech. And so, I worry a little bit about activity level. Like, if you watch some of his tape, there were some games where it felt like he just wasn't consistently trying defensively. So consistency-wise, that's going to be really important. If you only get 8 minutes a game or whatever at the start of his career as a 9th or 10th guy, which I think is very possible, he's got to be trying 100% of the time when he's on the floor. He's got to be going all out all the time. And I think if he does, he could be an absolute terror in transition at the NBA level. And he shot nearly half his shots from the three-point line this year in college. And again, it was only 36%, which is fine. But how is he going to shoot from the NBA three-point line on decreased volume in a bench role? The fully realized version of Terrence Shannon Jr. as a transition terror, a solid defender, a knockdown three-point shooter, alongside everything else the Wolves have, is a great fit. And so along with Dillingham, I really think it's a great night for Minnesota. Not giving up for a conference finals team to give up nothing from their current roster or 7 years down the line is a really, really good night. I don't care how weak the draft is. That's impressive. And, what's in it for the Spurs? I didn't cover this earlier, but for the Spurs making this deal, well, they don't want more young guys. They've already got such a young team. The idea is, well, hey, in 7-8 years or 2031, whenever that is, 7 years from now, they're banking on the Wolves being bad and then being good. So they'd rather swap with the Wolves in 2030, and then in 2031, they get the Wolves pick unprotected. Who knows? Maybe Ant's gone in 7 years. I hope not. I don't think he will be. But that's kind of what the Spurs are banking on. So I get it from their standpoint. It makes sense. And I absolutely get it from Minnesota's standpoint. All right. As I mentioned earlier, on Friday, I'm going to have Tyler Metcalf on the show. If the Wolves make a selection at 37, we'll probably cover that either. I don't know if I'll cover that with Tyler or just on my own on Friday's show, but Tyler and I are going to talk a lot of Rob Dillingham. I'm really excited to get his take. I know he's high on Dillingham. I want to hear him talk about him in the context of Minnesota's roster. He's obviously he covers the NBA draft more broadly for No Ceilings, but he also wrote about the Timberwolves for Canis Hoopus, was on our postcast this year for 30 some odd games or whatever. So has a Timberwolves view and a draft view. To see those two collide, I'm excited to hear him talk about Rob Dillingham. So we'll do that on Friday's show. And we'll talk Shannon too. We may save that for a show on Monday. Lots of draft coverage here over the next several days. And then, of course, free agency, the tampering period legal tampering starts Sunday. So not like the Wolves are going to be, ultra active in free agency necessarily, but they've got a mid-level, and in the wake of this draft, we'll see what they're up to next week. They struck relatively quickly last year. So we'll, of course, cover that here in the coming days as well. So look forward to Friday, having Tyler on the program. Make sure to stay tuned here to Locked On. Make sure to continue making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. A big thank you to those of you that already do. And a reminder that this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.